Hello and welcome to the left wing. So the World Cup moves on without Ireland. It's semi-finals weekend with Argentina playing New Zealand on Friday night and England against South Africa on Saturday night at the Stade de France. Rugby O'Connor and Cian Tracey are here. Rory, are you hanging in okay there in Paris?
Last man in Saigon. Yeah, no, it's quite warm in Paris. I've been looking at the reports from home and a little bit
Brim.
more glad than I was on Monday that I'm sticking around. It's spent about 2 hours in a forest in the west of the forest in the east of Paris, waiting for Steve Borthwick to arrive at an England press conference. I've better things to be doing in my life, but it was still perfectly pleasant. So yeah, no, still here, still surviving and starting to look forward to a pair of semi-finals. It wasn't, as I said to Keane when we dialed into our call at the start, it wasn't how I hoped to spend my Thursday, the 19th of October. I mean, we should be, if things had gone a different way, if Jordy Barrett hadn't held up Ronan Kelleher, we might be absolutely up the walls in the Stade de France trying to fill about 50 pages of World Cup semi-final preview stuff. So I still swap what I'm doing today for that. But yeah, look, it's nice to be here. It'd be great to be at the games over the weekend, even if they might not be sold out. That's the one of the talking points is that now that Ireland and France are gone, so are a lot of the people who bought tickets. So it's going to be interesting to see how everyone shows up and whether there's so many different kind of factors, how the quarterfinals bleed into the semis, how those teams pitch up again. Look, there's still going to be good games.
Rod, waiting. You said you're waiting for Borthwick in a Parisian forest. It sounds like a Beckett play. Sounds beautiful.
It was in the sunshine. It was he was about 2 hours out. It was the same place you guys were both out there last week, INSEP, the French Institute for Sport, which is in the middle of the Bois de Vincennes, which is a big forest out on the outskirts of Paris. It's an old military base, and there's nothing there. There's no cafe apart from high performance units, and it was a different part of it. And he was just late. They kept getting messages saying, "I'll be another 15 minutes." They're still training another 15 minutes, so they basically kept
That
everyone
happened in
waiting
the Six Nations as well, didn't it?
yeah, yeah. Well, they had a good excuse then. Their flight was delayed, but they were. It does seem to me that relations between Steve Borwick and the media are not particularly warm, and he was quite happy to leave everyone waiting. They put up Ben Earl and Joe Marchant, and Maro Itoje comes in, and Ireland did everything. This is very inside baseball, but he went into a corner of the room, and everyone scrummed around them in the middle. It was really kind of strange, and watching it from afar, having been part of it in the last couple of weeks, was interesting. And then Owen Farrell and Steve Borwick came in, quite bullish and not very warm and not many smiles or jokes. And the only time he smiled was when he was asked about Rassie Erasmus naming his team, and he kind of went, "Did he get it right?" And he's like, "No." He's like, "No." Very different atmosphere. I think the English guys have been having a very different World Cup to what we were having, but they're still here, so they're happy enough about that.
Yeah, they're getting the last word on that. Cian, how has the post World Cup come down been for you?
Absolutely miserable, Sinead. Miserable. I watched the game back for about the fourth time yesterday. I don't know what's wrong with me.
I'm
Because I was
burning the tape in.
I was doing a piece on the sort of the chances that Ireland missed in the 37 phases at the end, and whatever the opposite to a therapy session is, that's what it was like. So I am looking forward to the games this weekend, and maybe tomorrow when we're watching the first semi-final, albeit from Ireland and not in Paris. It will feel like the page has turned, but God, like it's been a long few days. And like it's funny, like I mean, I went playing football yesterday in a five-a-side game, and it's all anyone wanted to talk about, even guys who I'm not really sure are that into their rugby. We obviously didn't get a sense of that while we were in France, but having come back now, you can really see, I suppose, the fallout and how many people were actually into it. I was chatting to someone involved in the squad who said, just not sure how long it's going to take or how they're actually going to get over this, because I think the confidence was well placed, and they just obviously didn't deliver without going into old ground again. But while, yeah, in a way it's nice to be home, it would have been nicer to have finished off the last 2 weeks, and it would have been nice to be bringing the Left Wing Daily podcast for another 2 weeks as well. We didn't even get to properly say farewell before we abruptly left Sinead on our flights home, but I suppose that's the way the cookie crumbles. I did come back to Dublin on Monday evening, and I arrived in just before the team because I could see a couple of them in the airport in Charles de Gaulle. They weren't on the same flight, but when I arrived back to Dublin, I walked into arrivals, and there was loads of Irish fans with their flags and their jerseys, but quickly realised it wasn't me they were welcoming back. It was the fallen heroes, but that's the way it goes, I suppose.
We'll give you the
Hugo
fallen.
Keenan's dog, the star of the
Yes.
show there.
My dog was actually at the airport as well, but he didn't get snapped. So that was a nice moment for myself.
Well, something nice to come back to, Cian. Let's start with the New Zealand-Argentina semi-final, and we'll get to their starting teams in a second. But there's been a bit of carryover, Rory, from what happened at the end of Ireland's quarter-final with New Zealand, and specifically between Rico Ioane and Johnny Sexton. And Ian Foster with a bit of a dig at Johnny Sexton.
A bit, yeah, no, absolutely. It's interesting. I mean, Rassie Erasmus has been, and Jock Nienarber have both made comments about how they've managed their squad much better than other teams here, and the clear implication is that Ireland didn't. And I think one of the things that Ireland will have to interrogate as they review this is whether they were right to play their team over and over again. And obviously there is, they didn't play a rugby championship like South Africa, but South Africa have probably rotated over the last 2 years much more heavily than any other team, and almost have two teams ready to go with this tournament. And Ireland is something they need to look at. But yeah, Ian Foster was asked at his press conference. I was actually at the Argentina press conference at the same time, listening to Michael Checa speak a hybrid of Spanish, Italian, and Portuguese that apparently none of the Argentinians could understand, and I couldn't certainly understand for most of it, but it was hugely entertaining. But yeah, Foster was asked. He was asked directly about Rico Ioane and how he cupped his ears. And I'm not sure if this was broadcast on TV, but people I think saw Sexton going after him in the aftermath. After his initial disappointment, he saw Ioane cup his ears, make a shushing gesture, and Sexton went after him and had to be dragged away by Jack Conan. And Ian Foster, I mean, the All Blacks, they put up another video of them moving a car this week. I mean, their humility is off the charts. I mean, what I only did falls out of that policy, I would have thought. But at the same time, so Sexton went after him, and he said, Foster, a long way of answering your question, that, look, it's part of the game. It's come into the game more and more recently, and players don't seem to mind it. But some people have been going after referees after games as well, and that's not great either, is it? And that was obviously clear dig at Johnny Sexton, who, in fairness, kicking a man while he's down. But you got to look at the way Ireland conducted themselves after the Scotland game, and Peter O'Mahony's interview, and Peter O'Mahony's comments to Sam Cane, and all of that stuff. It's all in the game, and Ireland have been fairly quick to dish stuff out over the last couple of years, and people enjoy it. When that Sam Cane went viral, a clip went viral at the time, I guarantee it was stored up in Sam Cane's locker. It's not the reason New Zealand won, but it definitely was a contributing factor to Sam Cane's performance. So, they've been quite smug, the All Blacks. I thought they were smug in the aftermath afterwards, and maybe that's fair enough. But they were quite smug in the aftermath, and they're still smug. And I wonder, have they been? I remember being in the post match after they beat France in Wales in 2015, and that they wouldn't talk about the France match. They were already, we've turned the page. They just kept going. We're talking about South Africa now. South Africa. This week, it's just Ireland have bled. That game has bled into all of their conversations. Even as they try and move on, they keep returning back to it in conversation, and it's a very hard game for both them and South Africa to move on from, because they were such incredible fixtures and such incredible wins, and you've got a 6-day turnaround. So I wonder if that'll be a factor as they go into an Argentina game that they should win, but it's a free hit for Argentina. Argentina have already won their World Cup. They can go in and just throw everything at this, whereas New Zealand kind of probably think they're already in a final. They've just knocked off what was the world's number one team. Steve Borthwick told us repeatedly today, reminded us that South Africa are now the world's number one team because the wheel turns. But that's going to be a factor. It's how much did Ireland take out of New Zealand? How much did France take out of South Africa? And can they get back to that level?
Yeah, absolutely. It's reminded me of what happened in 2019. New Zealand produced a great performance against Ireland in the quarterfinals, but couldn't reproduce it a week later. England produced an excellent performance in their win over the All Blacks in the semi-final, but couldn't reproduce it against South Africa a week later. Like, how much, Cian, will those sides have learned from that? I mean, Argentina celebrated, their win over Wales. Ireland brought out perhaps one of the best performances from Sam Cane. Like, he did an excellent performance, but it is going to be interesting to see how both New Zealand and South Africa, being part of those epic quarterfinals, can come back down and come back up again for these semi-finals.
Yeah, absolutely, Sinead. I think that is the biggest challenge, really, because if these were sort of scratch games, you would be back in South Africa and New Zealand to win heavily. But obviously pressure does funny things, as we saw in the Ireland game as well. And I think that's the reason why Rassie Erasmus and Jack Nienarber have both been mentioning all week about the importance of rotating their squad, because I think they feel like they've safeguarded against the fact that, look, the Springboks had to go to the well last Sunday. The three of us were there at Stade de France. Like, they had to dig really, really deep. But I think they're almost trying to convince themselves that they're ready to go again. And they probably are, because they have heavily rotated throughout the pool stages. And didn't they have their break week for the last week of the pool stages as well, which fell at a really good time for them too. So they're obviously looking at the sort of quarterfinal, semi-final, final as sort of a three-legged thing. And they've already ticked one of the boxes, and now they're utterly confident that they're going to tick the second. I guess it's similar enough to the All Blacks. They rotated heavily, and we discussed this in the build-up to the Ireland game, that, you know, was it going to work in Ireland's favour, that they were more battle hardened, that they'd come through the South Africa game, the Scotland game, whereas New Zealand hadn't played a proper game really since the France game on the opening night, which they obviously lost, and that came on the back of losing the previous week to South Africa in Twickenham. But look, I mean, South Africa and New Zealand are experts at timing their run to perfection. I know, Sinead, you touch on 2019, and the All Blacks weren't quite able to back it up against what was an inspired England team, you'd have to say. But the way it's looking now, it's so difficult to see anything other than New Zealand and South Africa backing this up. You're right to point out the celebrations of the Argentinian supporters and the Argentinian players. You could see what it meant to them in the dressing room with the scenes. And like, that to me is kind of, you know, celebrating a huge occasion, because even people were saying it to me yesterday, oh, like Ireland, there's people still think Ireland over celebrated the win over South Africa in the pool stage, when like you didn't see anyone in the dressing room celebrating like Argentina did. I think they're two different things. And look, Argentina, I think, would admit themselves that they are in bonus territory now. They've done really well to get this far. A lot of people might not have expected them to get there, but look, Czechia and Contepomi have worked their magic, but it is going to take something big for them to, I think, beat the All Blacks. And you see like the way the All Blacks have gone with their team. They've brought in Mark Talea, they've brought back in Sam Whitelock and dropped Brodie Retallick to the bench. So perhaps they're even keeping someone like Retallick a little bit fresh with one eye on the final, which is risky. I'm not sure if Retallick has an injury. Maybe Rod, you might know, but it's interesting that like Retallick was outstanding, I thought, last week against Ireland. Now, obviously, Whitelock came on and obviously won the crucial turnover at the end, but it's such a luxury to be able to kind of swap those two guys. But perhaps they have one eye on the final as well.
Like, you wonder whether Ireland would have rotated James Ryan back in if they had, you know, having left him out for the last pool game. Would they have rotated him back in if he hadn't got injured? I mean, maybe that's what they were trying to do, because it's one thing I think they need to learn, is that, you know, you got to have some level, especially if you're going to be here for the whole thing, like, you know, which they've never actually done. You've got to rotate through, and New Zealand, they obviously have the data. I thought it's interesting that Dane Coles doesn't make it in, and they've gone with Tokialahu. You know, Dane Coles at one stage, just you've gone through all 37 phases. There was a truce between him and Tyke Byrne. They basically fell into each other, and Coles couldn't stand afterwards. And he was a sub; he'd only just come on. Like, you know, players just aren't able to go through 6.5 minutes. So they went so deep, the All Blacks, last week. So even I was surprised. I mean, Razzie put Kanan Moody and Esther Hazen and Pollard up for media earlier in the week, and almost, you know, it was obviously a trick. He was trying to show England one hand and play the other. But I'm actually surprised that the Bucks haven't done more rotation. I really thought they would for this game, just to try and freshen things up and bring some fresh legs in. But look, these coaches know their players. They've got the metrics. They've got the GPS data, and they know what their players can do. And I guess they have enough World Cup winners in each camp as well to kind of have the experience to kind of get things up. It's one thing that they have over everyone else. England have huge experience. They've got Lions who've played in decisive tests. They've got, you know, world players who played in World Cup finals. A lot of them. More actually, the England team is more experienced than the England coaching team, which is kind of a strange dynamic. So that there is a bit of lived experience there. And Argentina have a load of guys who played in the 15 semi-final against Australia, which Checo was coaching Australia for. So that stuff does count. But it's very hard to see anyone from the bottom half of the draw. The level of action we saw in Marseille compared to the level that we got to in Paris. It's very hard to see anyone bridging that gap in terms of intensity, quality, even the ball and play. They haven't been playing that sport, you know, and maybe they can. Maybe England roll back the years and Maro Itoje's, it becomes the 2019 Maro Itoje again, but it's a big stretch. And for Argentina, they have beaten New Zealand twice in the cycle, including one win in Christchurch. So they have that in their locker, but Ireland had that as well. I think playing New Zealand at a World Cup is a different proposition.
Yeah, well, you mentioned that win that they had last year, and then New Zealand come out and beat them by 50 points a week later. So, where could they trouble them? I mean, we know Michael Cheika, he has got skin in this game when it comes to World Cups. Like, are you just not giving them much of a chance at all? Because New Zealand probably won't need to be at their best in this one.
Yeah, but if they are off it then and Argentina are on it, like you said, they've beaten them twice and they can take advantage. I thought it was interesting yesterday. I was reading Rudd's piece about Michael Cheika talking about kind of what Contepomi has brought to Leinster, or sorry, from Leinster. He says he's gone up another level, which I always thought was the case. I mean, there's a lot of talk that Contepomi is going to become the next Argentinian coach after Checa, which would be amazing, really. And you think back to like Leinster's strike moves, like a lot of them were designed by Contepomi along with Stuart Lancaster, but a lot of them on Contepomi's part. So look, the big thing is the pack, and we saw last week that Ireland just didn't get parity up front. They were second best at the scrum. They were second best at the lineout, and most importantly, they were second best at the breakdown, which is where New Zealand really dominated. So, like Pablo Matera is out, isn't he? Like, I mean, how can I suppose Argentina plug that gap when you look at how well the All Blacks back row of Shannon Frizzell, Sam Cane, and Artie Surveya played last week? They were utterly, utterly outstanding. Like that Irish back row is pretty good in itself, and they were totally outplayed by their opposition. So I think that's going to be a huge area, Sinead. But like if Argentina can sort of get parity up front, then they definitely have the backs to cause trouble. But we kind of said the same things. Well, I would certainly have said the same things about Ireland, and they just weren't able to get a foothold into the game. So I think a lot will depend on if New Zealand are able to kind of mentally be screwed on as much as they were. And to be honest, I don't see any reason why they wouldn't be. They've possibly learned from 4 years ago, as you pointed out, Sinead. And look, there's a lot of pressure on New Zealand as well. We've talked about this in terms of losing to Ireland in the series last year, not winning the World Cup, because like let's face it, the All Blacks go into every World Cup expecting to win it. There's a couple of their guys are going to be retiring at the end of the World Cup. That was a big focus for Ireland, obviously, with Johnny Sexton and Keith Earls. They didn't quite get the fairy tale ending that they were hoping. And then you also have the fact that Ian Foster is going to be gone at the end of the World Cup. And for all we can, all people can criticize different elements of Foster's reign. Clearly, the players are playing for him, and that counts for a huge amount. And I would say a lot of those guys who've stood by Foster through thick and thin are going to want to send him off on a high, and also probably silence a lot of the doubters. And it'd be a remarkable situation if New Zealand do go on to win the World Cup. The pressure that Scott Robertson would be on as he steps into the hot seat as defending champions. So I think Argentina can trouble him, Sinead. I think the start is going to be really crucial because, as we saw last weekend, if you give the All Blacks any sort of head start, like 13-0 last weekend, as much as Ireland did well to pull it back, they were always chasing their tails and couldn't quite get in front. So if New Zealand have a similar start, it could be curtains from early doors.
Yeah. So South Africa against England on Saturday night at the Stade de France. They've named South Africa an unchanged 23 from the one that beat France last weekend. I saw Razzie Erasmus mention about beef with England. Andre Pollard said, if there's going to be beef, there is going to be beef, lads. Or if there is no beef between these two sides, I'll be very disappointed, Rory.
Like there's definitely like England were at pains to talk about how this is a new group and that losing a World Cup quarter or World Cup final 4 years ago to this South African team, and fairly, maybe humiliating is too strong, but they were fairly well beaten on the day, and having gone in as favourites, they were beaten roundly in all the areas that would hurt. The scrum, the maul, the ruck. They lost all those battles, and then the missed tackles towards the end. Players that don't normally miss tackles getting absolutely schooled. It was a humiliating night, really, in Yokohama. So that has to be there for like Owen Farrell and Maro Itoje and Corny Laws and all these players who were there 4 years ago. But they're not as good a team as they were 4 years ago, and I don't know if South Africa are better. I've been kind of consistently arguing throughout this whole tournament that they're not, but they haven't got any worse. I think that's clear as day now, because any team that beat that France team and in playing that well has something about it, and they've got a genius coaching staff. We can debate the rights and wrongs of some of the stuff they do, but they're ahead of the game. They're doing things that no one else is doing, like the calling the scrum off a mark. That's the way Razzie Rasmus explained that afterwards was just, it was so well. The clarity of his thought was just so, I thought, impressive. And I think they'll do stuff like that again because they don't want to get into, they want to play Borthwick ball. Like Borthwick wants them to kick, get into kick battle, make mistakes in their own half. I think they'll try and diffuse that themselves without and play the game on their own terms because they are the world champions and they're a far better team on paper than England are. And I think that there will be something in their locker that we've never seen before, that we haven't seen for a long time. And um, ultimately, where England need to beat them, if England need to get so much right in areas that they're deficient against South Africa. So they need South Africa to be off it. They need to win the battle up front. Like their props, they've gone with their most experienced props. Like the idea that Dan Cole will be back 4 years on is just, it's amazing. It's an amazing story. Like, he wasn't really a factor for a lot of this whole cycle. But if you got Cheslin Colby one on one, we might be in trouble. So there's a lot of weaknesses in that England lineup. They can produce it for 80 minutes. There's good players there with great experience, but when in the last show they're good enough to win a World Cup semi-final against South Africa, maybe you don't need to show it across 4 years. Maybe you can produce it tomorrow on Saturday, and that's all that matters. But on the evidence that we have in front of us, it's very hard to call anything other than a comprehensive South Africa win.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with all that. I think it's interesting, not interesting, but obviously Marcus Smith has been ruled out with concussion. Like, I wonder, is that almost sort of a blessing in disguise, which sounds like a horrible thing to say, but in terms of Steve Borthwick's selection, because I would have been shocked if he'd went with Marcus Smith rather than Freddie Stewart for a game like this. Look, I think Freddie Stewart is a bit overrated, if I'm being honest, by the English kind of media and stuff like that. I think he's a solid pair of hands. He's good under a high ball, but he's not exactly the most cutting edge fullback, particularly on counter attack. But what he'll give you is stability in the backfield. And look, we saw what South Africa did to France last week in terms of Manny Libbok, like the kicking. I was watching it back actually yesterday, and what they did so well was getting the likes of Etzebeth and Peter Steph-Toy on the kick chase. It wasn't just the outside backs like Arense or Cheslin Colby. They were actually getting their biggest players on the kick chase. And when you have athletes like Etzebeth and Peter Steph, it allows you to do things that other teams can't do. So I think maybe Freddie Stewart might give a bit of stability back there, but Rudd is right. I mean, the fact that it's Joe Marler and Dan Cole starting, I think that Springboks are going to be licking their lips at that, to be honest. I think they're going to totally go after them at the scrum. We all know the bomb squad that they have on the bench that they're going to roll off. And okay, England have a couple of decent props that they can bring on as well. And that's probably why Steve Borthwick has put them on the bench, because he's mindful of what's going to be coming off in the second half. But I just see a massive difference in that South African pack compared to this English pack, and that's where I think the game will be won and lost, Sinead.
Yeah, we will still finish with predictions, even though I kind of know what way you're going. But I saw Jim White writing in the Telegraph this morning that Irish, Welsh and Scottish fans, quote, might be advised to put aside tradition, temporarily swallow and get behind England. What do you make about that, lads? Do I need to ask?
English people telling Irish, Welsh, and Scottish people what to do has always worked out well in the past, hasn't it? So I think people can make up their own minds about what team they want to get behind this weekend. I'm fascinated to see who Irish people would actually want to be in this final.
Argentina, surely everyone's up for Argentina.
Yeah, I think everyone would like. I think from myself point of view, I think that Ireland, the team, would probably, well, if they care, I'm sure they've all checked out at this stage, but the side of the draw, I would like to see the two teams from the side of the draw Ireland are on get there, because I want to see the best two teams in the final, and I think the best two teams remaining in the tournament are New Zealand and South Africa. And selfishly, I'd like to see the two of them go toe to toe in person, because anytime I've seen them, I've only seen them once before in person. And twice. I saw them in Yokohama and I saw them in Twickenham, and they're just amazing games. And they are the best two teams. Like, we can make up all these kind of different routes for England and Argentina to get there. And look, there's legitimacy in all of them. Anyone can win a game over 80 minutes, and a red card could change everything. But it would take an awful lot for them to get there. I can't see it, and it would reward the teams who've had the best, who've put the most into it. I think for those two teams to get into it. And look, Argentina knocking off New Zealand would be an amazing story. Check Contepomi being here for the end will be amazing, and it would give us an Irish angle. Amazingly, how many how many coaches, I'm writing about this for tomorrow, how many coaches who've been through the Irish system are involved this weekend. All 4 teams have a coach who's been at an Irish province, or coached Ireland. So that's an interesting angle as well. But yeah, can't see anything other than the top 2 going through.
Yeah, you too, Cian. New
Yeah,
Zealand.
I think after the high of last weekend, the quality of rugby, and it's worth repeating again that what we were treated to on Saturday and Sunday night, and again, like watching it back, it kind of reinforces what we probably all thought live, that it was just an absolute privilege to be there for both of those games. But I think there'll be a slight come down this weekend, if I'm honest, before it builds back up again to the final. And I wouldn't be surprised if both semi-finals are double-digit victories, as in double scores, for New Zealand and South Africa.
Okay, well, me and Cian will be watching from Dublin. Rory, you enjoyed over there in Paris on Friday and Saturday night.
I'll do my best to be good. Looking forward to it now. It was a slow burner of a week, but I think we've cleared all the Irish stuff out of the system at this stage, and it's time to move on.
Yeah, okay, Rory and Cian, thank you for that. Will and Luke and Rory will be back next Tuesday to review those World Cup semi-finals and look ahead to the final. Enjoy the World Cup semis. Thanks for listening.